This week on Writers, Inc.
I think some of the best writing comes from a place not of plot or character development, and obviously those are important, but from a place of emotion. How is this character feeling? And I think when I wrote Third Person Past, that wasn't coming out. So I think shifting to use, like you said, to taking over the skin of that person, that's where you really tap into your empathy as a writer, and you are literally in their shoes. And you're like, this is how I'm feeling all the time. I feel the sun on my face, much more than she felt the sun on her face. So it really changed.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie on a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories. All have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
It's Jenna Brown.
Kevin Tomlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So I've got a weird problem I want to run by you guys. So my daughter's elementary school is right across the street from our house. So we're there quite a bit. And my wife went over there yesterday to, I forget what she was helping the teacher out with something. But my daughter was out on the playground because it was recess. And she asked my wife to film a video really quick because she was dribbling a basketball for the first time. Which was awesome. So like she sends me, she's like, "Hey Dada, this is for you." Look, and then she's dribbling the basketball and all excited about it. And she ends the video with, "Don't forget to like or subscribe." And then disconnects. and I'm sitting there, I'm watching it. I'm like, I don't even know where she picked that up because like we don't really let her have access to any, like she doesn't watch YouTube or any of the things where you would normally see that. So I don't know where that
She has access to other people though.
I think that's what's going on, but like, kids don't bring phones to elementary school. So I don't know. It kind of scared me and made me proud for like 1 second. I'm like, oh, she's got a career path as an influencer. Oh, screw that. We don't want her to. So now like
my guess would be, even though they're young, it's probably like imagination. They're probably pretending they're YouTubers and saying that. And she's picked it up.
Maybe.
You'd be surprised. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you never know. I mean, kids sneak electronics all the time. I know that my niece and nephew, like, they're not supposed to bring phones to school, but phones always end up at school. So,
yeah,
maybe that's what's going on.
Or maybe there's a film crew following her around and you don't know about it.
Maybe she's got some huge following on social media that I don't know about. She's got a 6-year-old double life going on.
Yeah. Yeah. My son made a YouTube channel I didn't know about and was putting videos up. So when he was pretty young.
Wow.
He didn't show himself in it, which is good because I'd always had the talk with him, but he was filming himself playing video games, not him, but just like the video game and then like putting it online. So
that's a thing, but like people watch that stuff. It drives me nuts. My daughter went down the rabbit hole we cut cable like years back. So like our TVs are all smart TVs. And the downside of that is it kind of learns, based on what you're watching, it shows you suggestions and things like that. And at one point it did throw YouTube up there and I caught her watching like video after video of like little kids unboxing toys and stuff like that. And then like that night I took YouTube off the TV so that she couldn't see it anymore. But yeah, all that stuff is a thing. And, they're making a ton of money, with it.
I have a nephew who he started streaming Minecraft when he was playing it, and he was building these things in Minecraft and making them available to people. And he, through no action of his own, really, they were selling these things. Well, his parents, when they kind of came across this eventually, they noticed that he had like $60,000 in an account marked under his name in sales. And so they've moved all that into a college fund, and so they've continued to let him do that. But and he had no idea. He didn't know he was selling anything. He wasn't pitching it. He was just building stuff he thought was cool, and they were buying it on Minecraft. I didn't even know that was a thing, but yeah.
And it turns into real money.
Apparently, you can turn it into real money.
How does that even work? I don't know. I don't want to know. I don't think I want to know.
I don't want to know how it works because I'm going to find myself on Minecraft trying to sell products. That's what's going to happen.
You need to get on the Apple defense team. Did you hear about this?
Yes.
So like now they're being sued for antitrust by the DOJ.
Right. And I've been following a little bit of it, and I think that is it's kind of fascinating because I'm like, what took you so long to go after them for this stuff? But like one of the things specifically that they're going after that I think relates to us as authors is they're going after them for that 30% cut that they take of anything that gets sold on their iOS platform. And so that's going to impact, like, right now, if you go into, if you're a Kindle reader and you want to buy something on a Kindle platform, like the only way to do it is to go into a browser, go to the Kindle store in the browser and that sort of thing. But this would, if they can eliminate this, Amazon would be sure to start selling stuff directly from the Kindle app again. And that would, I think, boost author sales, I think, quite a bit, because I think that is a barrier to entry for some people. Like, trying to tell someone, go find my book, if they're a Kindle reader, and I think the same thing applies on Apple books, but I think they, because they own that platform, there's no competition, there's no problem there, and that's why it's a antitrust thing. So that's just one of many.
Oh, so they're going after him for other stuff too. It's not just the 30%.
Yeah, there's part of the case is what people are saying. They're going after the green bubble, which means that if you use iPhone and you send a text message to someone who's not on iPhone, the interaction involves a green bubble instead of a blue bubble. The green bubble indicates that you're not going to be able to share practically anything with that person. Like, you send a video, it may not go through. Images may not go through. There's all kinds of problems that come up between these two platforms, and it's all on Apple's side. Like, they're the ones actively blocking that stuff because they want to encourage you to get an iPhone. So they're going after them for things like that. There's a whole lot. I haven't read it.
Cord compatibility is the one that drives me crazy. Is why their cords are not compatible with everything. So
yes,
I hope they win that one.
That's one now the EU has been going after them for this stuff for forever. And the EU forced them to start using USB-C on new devices, new iPhones. But Apple being Apple, they built in some sort of proprietary circuit, so you have to use their approved USB-C charging cables, and which completely circumvents exactly what the EU is trying to accomplish there. So hopefully, I hope that works out.
I don't know how I feel about all this because I'm an Apple person. Like, I've got, my Mac is in front of me, my iPhone, I've got the Apple Watch, and like all those things work perfectly together. But I do get it. Like, my brother is the only person in our family who's got an Android phone and refuses to switch. And like, we can't include him on a group chat just because of what you mentioned. It automatically skews the video up. If we send a video, like, nobody else can see it. So like, we purposely exclude my brother from family things just because he's got an Android phone, which is really, really silly. But, we like to share the pictures and the videos of the kids. So,
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I like the cord too. I mean, because I know that it's a pain, but I know that they do it because a lot of those cords, especially the cheap ones, come with like spyware and like other things. And, one of the reasons I went to Mac was because I had a lot of problems with just like, PCs. Just, I never had one that like functioned well after 3 years. But my Mac is like 12, 15 years going strong. And, some of that is because of the limitations that they put on it. And so like, I guess I'm with you, JD. I don't exactly know how I feel about it because, some of the form and function work beautifully and prevent a lot of the problems that I encountered when I had an Android phone and when I had a PC. And I'd never go back to either platform. So I don't know.
I'm same. I'm also Apple cult, so
yeah.
I'm
so entrenched in the Apple ecosystem. There's no out for me.
you do get to that point. Like, it's just, it wouldn't be worth the switch even if you wanted to do it. So anyway,
it just works so nice together.
Yeah.
Speaking of news,
Yeah, speaking of
we want
news.
to read some news. In more publishing focused news, KDP invitation only beta for audiobooks. Virtual Voice launched in November of 2023. Right now, it is an invitation only beta in the US that allows KDP authors to quickly and easily produce an audiobook version of their ebook using virtual voice narration, a synthetic speech technology. Authors can create an audiobook from an ebook in just a few steps. Authors can check voice samples, preview, customize the audiobook. Authors can set a suggested price between $3.99 and $14.99 and will receive a 40% royalty. Once published, audiobooks will be available within 72 hours and be distributed wherever Audible books are sold. Audiobooks created via virtual voice will be clearly labeled, and as with any audiobook, customers will be able to listen to samples.
So I got this email, and I went ahead and did it, and it's right. It took me maybe 5 minutes from start to finish to set up an audiobook. I actually did it for Dracula, which I keep meaning to go out and check and see how many are actually out there. But I've got a special edition of Dracula where I wrote an introduction, and it includes Dracula's guest. And it was a huge pain in the butt to get that published because Dracula is in public domain. So you have to jump through a couple of hoops in order to get it out there. So I was honestly surprised that they would let me create the audiobook from it. I picked my voice, though. It gave me I think 5 or 6 different ones to choose from. They all sounded good on the samples. But I just kind of clicked through, set it up, and put the minimum price on it and threw it out there. So we'll see how it goes. I think, Kevin, you did one too, right?
Yeah, I actually, everything that was in my catalog that was not already in Audible, I did. And so that was quite a few books. And it does work great. I'm going to say, though, this is my suspicion, but I think that the fact that they label it very prominently, that it's a digital narration, I think that's actually turning people away from buying the audiobooks. Because what I'm seeing is I have the books that I have that are all human narrated, they do great and they do fine. Then there's a sudden drop off as soon as you get to the ones that are AI narrated, like people aren't buying them. So maybe I'm not promoting them enough. I don't know, but
maybe they need to say human narrator and then just put a little wink emoji right after it.
Pay no attention to the blue banner above me. This is a human narrated book. Yeah, maybe.
I'm real, I promise.
Yeah, but I've been satisfied with the quality of it and everything. I think it's good for me because I have a ton of books that I didn't get moved into audio right away, and to do it now would cost me maybe $100,000. I mean, it would be very expensive for me to do it. So my plan here is to use AI narration. Whatever revenue I make from those, I can fold right back in and pay for human narrators. That's the plan.
I didn't look at the flip side of this. So if you want to pull one of those books out of the AI narration, did you look to see if that's an easy thing to do, or are you locked in for a certain time frame? I didn't read any fine print. I just clicked right through.
I think it all kind of depends on how you went in there. Like if you went into, because they offer an exclusivity thing just like ebooks. I think my understanding is that you can turn that off. However, even if that's on, you can still offer a human narrated audiobook. Now the rules get dicey when it comes to whether or not you can have both of those on Audible, but you can, I'm kind of thinking I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work yet. And I'm still learning things about it as I go. So, I don't want to say something to be completely wrong.
I tried to do it for Forsaken because that's the only book where I actually own the audio rights, but it wouldn't let me. I got an error message saying that an audiobook already exists.
Yeah.
So I guess if there's any audiobook out there, I won't let you do it.
Yeah. Well, not any audiobook out there. Any audiobook that's on Audible.
Oh,
because I had audiobooks that were on other platforms that were not on Audible for one reason or another, and it let me do that with no fight. So, and I haven't found anything in the terms of service that say you can't do that. So, someone will happily correct me via email, I'm sure.
Yep.
Next up, AI translation. How to train the horses of enlightenment. Translation algorithms have generally improved in recent years, but can they work on literature? human practitioners of the art are not convinced. Since the adoption of neural networks in 2015, translation algorithms have greatly improved. Academic publishers have been using AI since 2018 with the release of a French version of Deep Learning, translated to English by DeepL. Trade publishing followed suit. The advent of AI introduced a dilemma. Should a text be translated from scratch, or could it run through AI translation software first? Unreadable translations of pirated books flooding the internet show that the process cannot currently be fully outsourced to computers. Instead, publishers have begun to use AI-assisted translation. Some European presses work with Nuanced, I think is how that's pronounced, Nuanced, which employs humans to edit machine-translated books. The company aims to maintain the quality of traditional translations, offering savings to publishers and market rates to linguists. When asked about quality, even some of the proponents of AI believe it may be good enough for a potboiler, but not for a poetry collection. Christoph Lind, the CEO of the Swedish publisher Lind & Company, uses machine translation for genres such as crime and romance. Mark Polizzotti, who has translated more than 50 books from French, including works by Gustave Flaubert, said, by doing this work for me, AI would remove the aspects I most value, and I'd rather poke around along at my language at my language pace and come out the other end with an increased knowledge of both the work and myself.
You know, this is one of those things, like I hate to see AI taking jobs from people, but at the same time, I can really see this as a huge time saver, right? Like you take the book, you dump it into AI, it spits it out in the new language, then you have a human run through it and actually clean up, you know, wherever it goofs, because there's obviously going to be, you know, some problems there, but, you know, versus just translating from scratch. The only issue I've ever had with a real translator was with Fourth Monkey, which is I think it's in 34 different languages at this point, but when they translated it to French, the translator that they used, which was a human, made a lot of mistakes in that translation, and that's the only country where the book didn't sell well. So like all we can really point at is the translation, and it makes me wonder, like if they were to do something like this, would it have, you know, come out differently? And those rights are about to expire, so I guess we'll find out within the next year or so when a new publisher picks it up, because I imagine they're going to go through a process like this. But you know, that being said, like with things like poetry, you know, where the words actually matter, you know, more than just communicating a thought, I don't know that AI is ever going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's interesting because, you know, especially with classical books that have been translated, they'll say, oh, read this translation and not this translation. And you know, they're both human translations. So, yeah, I don't know how that's going to affect it. Then can you have maybe someone who's not as skilled of a translator doing this work? Yeah, I'm not sure it will ever be good enough for poetry, because how do you choose this word over that word? How, when something is like an idiom in a language, how do you translate that? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this.
I do think this hybrid approach is the right process, though, because you can pay. Like a friend of mine uses AI to do his translations, and then he goes on Fiverr and finds somebody and pays them, you know, kind of low rates to just go through and make sure that the thing makes sense. And it specifically asks them to like localize it. It's like, you know, if it is a German translation or Spanish translation, like, you know, are the references translating as well as the context of it translating as well? So, and that saves him a ton of money, because if you paid someone to do the translation by hand, you know, it gets pretty expensive. And the sad part is you still don't know. Like JD, you said, like you've got human translators and they're making mistakes. How would I know? I don't speak German, you know, much. And so I have to rely on my German translators to get it right.
Yeah.
All right. So next up, new data, Association of American Publishers, AAP, reports overall publishing industry up 0.4% for calendar year 2023 and down 2.5% for the month of December. The Association of American Publishers today released its Stat Shot report for December 2023, reflecting reported revenue for trade, meaning consumer books, religious presses, higher education course materials, and professional publishing. Total revenues across the categories of December 2023 were down 2.5% as compared to December 2022, coming in at we're gonna say that's 920 million. Okay, numbers threw my brain off for just a second there. Year-to-date revenues were up 0.4% at 12.6 billion for the year of 2023. Trade revenues were down 0.3% at 8.9 billion for the calendar year. Hardback revenues were up 0.4%, coming in at 3.3 billion. Paperbacks were down 2.0% with 3.1 billion in revenue. Ebook revenues were up 0.6% as compared to 2022. And the digital audio format was up 14.9%, coming in at 864 million in revenue. Physical audio was down 16.2%, coming in at 12.9 million. If you followed all that, dear listeners, God bless you. So
I've got a theory. I'm going to blame December on global warming.
On global warming.
Global warming.
Think about it, because it was warmer this year than it was last year, which means people were not trapped in their houses as much as they might have been, and might have been outside doing something rather than curled up with a book in front of the fireplace. That's what I'm going to blame it on. It's all global warming.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It was colder here in Las Vegas. I know that overall it was warmer in a lot of places, but it was really cold here. I think they said one of the record cold winters.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well, there goes my theory then.
We didn't have as many freezes here this year as we had the past 2 years, but we did get a couple of deep freezes here in the Austin area.
Yeah, I think it wasn't record.
You're in Texas, which I think of as hot all the time. Jenna is in Vegas, which I also think of as hot all the time.
True.
I'm in New England, and it was hot all winter long. I think I plowed my driveway 3 times, and the snow didn't stick around for more than a day or two before we're back up in the 50s or so, and it melted. So it's almost like the winter has just shifted.
It does get cold here.
Yeah.
Which always surprises people.
Well, I'm farther north than all of you.
Yeah, you're in the Arctic somewhere.
Yeah, you are.
I think we shoveled twice. So it was definitely warmer than it has been. I thought it was interesting. I expected the ebooks and the digital to be up because that's usually the way that it goes. But it's interesting to me that hardback is up versus paper and mass market, which are down.
I don't know if that surprises me as much, only because I've been big in the Bookstagram community. I mean, not that I've posted lately, but
that's what I'm thinking. Social media.
I do know that, they've been sort of talking about how that aesthetic of having the bookshelves and owning the book and a hardcover just looks so beautiful on a shelf. And so there has been, I think, a growing shift towards that, owning the hardcover, that I do think is largely TikTok and Instagram that have been kind of driving that.
The whole direct sales movement is kind of pivoting on that sort of thing right now too. And that goes back, I quote this all the time, but Seth Godin had said that if you're in the book business, you're in the souvenir business now. And because everybody could go pick up a book on ebook and read it anytime they want, but people want a more visceral experience. They want that hands-on, tangible thing. And the hardcovers, it's getting less expensive to do really fancy stuff. An author that I had lunch with a few days ago, he's doing special edition releases of all his books in leather bound with gold foil edges and stuff, man. And I'm okay, hook me up. And it's not expensive.
I totally don't get sucked into that at all.
That's the fancy schmancy box set. I haven't gone into that yet. That's not something I've attempted yet. I'm timid about it.
Oh, I'm so excited that the US is finally getting behind sprayed edges and stenciled edges and the foil hardcover that. I am a sucker for those, and have spent entirely too much money on UK editions because they have, they had that was almost your only option for a long time. So now I'm starting to see a lot of new releases. Yeah, that first
I wasn't just pointing at
run.
my UK editions back there.
I know. Which is brilliant, actually, because it's the first run, first edition. And so, if you want to really get pre-orders going, that's and again, TikTok and Bookstagram, like they want the pretty
You
books.
guys are all you think too small. What I do is I just have like hundreds of Kindles made with my cover glued to them. And that's what I'm selling now. Individual
edition Kindles.
Special edition, and it only has that one book on it.
That's awesome.
That is interesting. I don't know how that would look on a shelf though. So, I mean, it's,
Yeah. Yeah.
Got to work on that.
When you're writing a book, the first draft is the easy part. It's what comes after that hurts. The confusion, the self-doubt, questioning this, questioning that, trying to get feedback so you can feel confident making changes. It's a lot to handle. And that's why I'm delighted to say that this episode of the Writers Inc. podcast is sponsored by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that can make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. From start to finish, everything you need to produce a strong, confident story is at your fingertips. Get instant developmental feedback on plot, conflict, characters, themes, and more through the Story Analyzer. And edit each sentence to perfection with a complete interactive editing suite packed with reports and insights. And that's not to mention additional benefits like private community forums and live members-only support and writing sessions every single week. It's an incredible place to be for any writer. And listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can take advantage of lifetime AutoCrit Pro membership for one single payment. That's right, no renewal fees. Head to autocrit.com/JD to get yourself a lifetime membership now. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
All right, JD, who's up this week?
This week we've got Carter Wilson. He's a USA Today best-selling author of numerous psychological thrillers, as well as an International Thriller Award finalist and 5-time winner of the Colorado Book Award. His latest book is called The Father She Went to Find and releases April 2nd. Here he is, Carter Wilson.
Mr. Carter Wilson, thank you for being a guest on the show. We're really happy to have you here, man.
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And you've got you're a lot like me in that you've got your fingers in a lot of different pies. You've got not just this amazing book that we are going to talk about. You've got other works out there. Plus, you've got the whole podcast thing going for you. I'm always happy to talk to people who podcast. That always makes me happy.
I started it a couple of years ago. It's called Making It Up, and I just talked to other writers. And I like the format where you kind of explore a person's journey, right?
Right.
So that was kind of my focus, is like, how did you get to become a writer? That's what I wanted to know. So I've done a lot of episodes since then, and it's a lot of work, as you know. There's not a lot of money in it, if any, and but it's but just now I know all these cool writers, and it's fun to have that conversation.
How has that shaped your own writing? Has it helped you out at all?
If anything, it affirms things for me. And the affirmations are that what I've always suspected is that there's just no one way to write a book. There's a million different ways to write a book. Everyone's got a different approach. Everyone's cycle on the publication journey is different, but it's not linear. It's so fascinating to me that it's just like, hey, there's a lot of ways you can come at this. And as long as you're true to yourself, as long as you're honest in your writing and you're writing for the joy and the love and the passion of writing, good things will happen. And I've just seen that time and time again being affirmed through my interviews.
In all those interviews with authors, what are some like common themes that you kind of keep popping up?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, I'm about to write an article on that. There's a lot of common things, but really, it's what I see most about successful writers is the persistence and the consistency of writing. Not waiting for the muse, not being in the mood to write, but writing every single day, even if it's 5, 10, 15 minutes, even on the days where it feels like data entry. You're building that muscle. And I see that in all the writers. And it's a cliche, right? Like, what's advice you would give to writers? Well, you got to write. But it's true, because the actual not being a consistent writer is what stops 95% of aspiring writers.
Right.
It's like going to the gym, right? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it sucks and it's hard, but over time you will build that muscle and it will get easier. And you always have to remember why you're doing it because it's tough.
Yeah. I will say this, like I've been writing all my life, and it's still, every time I sit down to do it, it's still something I got to make myself do. Like it's
Yeah,
just never become that thing that I'm like, all right, I'm going to go sit for an hour or two and stare at this screen.
totally. I mean, and once you start writing, you get to that
Yeah.
space pretty quickly of like, now I'm glad I'm in this world. But you know why I think that all is? I think because writing is one of those few things, if you're really focused on it, you have to be 100% present and you can't shortchange yourself. Like with so many other things, you can half-ass it and it's fine. Nobody really cares. But when you're looking at your own creative fiction and you have this sense of like, this sounds good enough. No, you've got to be honest with yourself and say, no, it's not good enough. If you have the smallest doubt that it's not good enough, and that takes a lot of work and it's
Yeah.
hard to face that sometimes. You're like, I don't want to do that. But that's the only way you're going to deliver a good product.
So do you have that discipline? Do you sit down every day and write? Are there days you
I
miss?
do. I
Yeah.
do. I have to. And I'm the
Yeah.
same with you. So because I don't outline, I think that helps because
Yeah.
I'm excited to find out what happens next.
Yeah.
That's a journey for me, but I only write an hour a day and or maybe 500 words or whatever that is, maybe it's done in half an hour.
Yeah.
But if I do that 7 days a week, I can get a novel done 6 to 7 months, first draft, shitty first draft. Sorry. I don't know if I can curse, but, and then going through the different edits on that, and it doesn't take all that long if you do it every day.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, okay, you get that first draft. What's the first step after the first draft? What do you do next?
Well, it used to be take a huge drink, but I stopped drinking about a year ago. I don't have one of the things that I struggle with is patience. The best advice, and you'll hear it from Stephen King for sure, is like, hey, print it out, put that manuscript in a drawer for 6 months. I can't do that. I've got to
Yeah.
immediately turn around and start editing. But I rarely go back and look at what I've written. So when I go back to the beginning, it's kind of like reading something new for the first time. So I
Yeah.
do have kind of a fresh set of eyes on it, but I immediately go back and start edit one. It's usually 2 full edits, and then I'll give it to my partner to look at. She's the first person who sees it. She'll give it an edit and some feedback, and then I send it to my agent.
I always envy guys like you, by the way, who have a partner who's willing to read your work. Like my wife will read it, but she's like, you write too much. She's like, I got other books I want to read.
Well, this is a once a year process, so it's not like I'm taxing her too much. And
Right.
it's not, honestly, it's not necessarily the stuff she would go to a bookstore and buy, dark psychological thrillers.
Yeah.
But she gives me honest feedback, and she's got an amazing eye for detail and really helps me out in getting things in good place before I give it to my agent. And of course, when you get back from the agent, then that's a whole other
Yeah. It's
2 or 3 rounds before
right,
you even give it try to sell it or give it to your editor.
How much, agent feedback can be interesting. How much do you rely on agent feedback? Do you ever push back?
Rarely, because I've learned over time, the advice I've gotten from my trusted readers, who are my partner, my critique group, my agent, my editor, it's usually all good.
Yeah.
And and the stuff that sometimes I'll question something, and then I'll have to look back and be like, yeah, I think you're right about this, or at least give it a try. The only times I ever push back on anything, it's very minor stuff. Like,
Yeah.
who cares? And it's usually nothing the editor's like adamant over.
Yeah.
But as scary as those editorial letters are, you open it and you want to just like take a week off.
Right. Yeah.
You look at it and you're like, this is all going to make my book better, because that's what everyone's job is in
Right.
the team, is to make the book, to sell as many copies as you can. So everyone's working towards the same goal. So you just have to be a team player and really frame your mind and be open to that kind of advice.
Yeah. Those agents and editors the one thing they have that a lot of us don't have is like they know what's selling. So, makes
Absolutely.
sense.
Right. And
Right.
you might not even be aware of it. They'll come at you with a suggestion, and that, they're not asking you to change your writing to directly fit the market, but they might say, this is a subject that, is currently like people don't want to talk about, or something,
Yeah.
if it's something minor, and just, or I'll
Mhm.
use some language in my book, and my editor might be, do we have to use this word? And I'll look at it, I'm like, no, we don't have to use this word. And if you don't like the word and it's not a big deal to me, I'll take it out. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not the hill I'm going to die on. Other
Yeah.
things if they told me to change my ending, um, I'd like to see a really good argument for that, but they're
Yeah.
probably going to be right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
So
it's
you
their
mentioned,
job. That's what they do.
right. Yeah, exactly. If you can't trust them to, to at least advise you in that direction, like, what's the point?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so you mentioned that you are that you don't plot or that you don't outline. I too am a pantser. But
Mm.
how do you keep things on track? Like, how do you gauge the progress of the book? Do you know the ending? I mean, and what is it you use to keep yourself
I
on
don't know
track?
anything. I
Yeah.
know that I usually it depends on the book, but usually it's just like I have an idea for an opening scene. So if I was going to sit down and turn on Netflix, turn on a show, and this opening scene happened, I would
Yeah.
be like, whoa, I'm so confused, but I want to know more. So I
Mhm.
just come up with this really confusing scene. And then I spend the rest of the book trying to figure out what that scene means, and see just kind of where it takes me. And I usually know the ending maybe around 75, 80% in. It kind of occurs to me, but you just kind of hope your subconscious is working. I mean, I've tried outlining, and my brain doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
I
Yeah.
can't think of everything. Like, I'm so impressed with people who are like, yeah, I know exactly what's going to happen in every chapter. Like, I don't even know how many chapters. I had no idea. So, I
Right.
mean, I've
Right.
killed people on whims just to see what it feels like. And that totally would change the direction of my book, maybe for the better.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you threw your book in at the end there because that hopefully no one takes that comment out of context. Like I feel people just to see what it feels like. So, well, speaking of killing people, just to see what it feels like, which may or may not have anything to do with your current book releasing. You've got a book coming out in April 2nd. You skipped the April Fool's Day problem.
Yeah. Well,
Congratulations.
books come out on Tuesdays for
They come out on
whatever
Tuesdays.
reason.
So
Yeah.
April 2nd, 2024, The Father She Went to Find. I have to tell you, this immediately it piqued my interest because I have this obsession with the sort of with acquired savant syndrome and with
Oh.
photographic memory. So you immediately grabbed me. So what was that? You did a deep dive into learning more about that. You want to talk about acquired savant syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, acquired savant syndrome, as you know, is exceedingly rare. I mean, most people know what a savant is. A savant is a person with obviously exceptional abilities within their mind, and it can manifest itself in many different ways. Most of the preponderance of the time, that's usually something you're born with, and it's also usually associated with maybe an autism spectrum or something like that. Acquired savant syndrome means you weren't born like that. Something
Right.
physically happened to you, and in layman terms, knocked your brain in such that all of a sudden you have these abilities.
Yeah.
And it's funny. This is a rare exception. This book of where it wasn't one where I thought of the opening chapter. And I think, and you've talked to a lot of authors, so I'd be curious to know if you've heard this more, but this was my pandemic book.
Oh yeah.
And during the pandemic, all I wanted to do was write about any time other than now.
Yeah.
Everybody was kind of feeling nostalgic. And at the same time I was thinking that, I just kept thinking about this woman in my head. And she, this sounds a little precious, but it's true. She just kind of came out of nowhere, and I kept thinking about her. And all I knew is she was young. She was 18 when I first thought about it. She ended up being 21 in the book.
Mhm.
And she was a savant, and the year was 1987. That's all I knew.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what what is her story? And I decided she wasn't born like that, but she had become a savant because she had been pushed down the stairs by her mother when she was 6 years old and went into a coma. And when she came out of the coma, she suddenly had these abilities, an ability to draw, with photorealistic talent. She could remember everything that was ever said to her, anything that she's ever read. And she could see number. Anytime you said a number to her, she saw it as a color.
Yeah.
So everything, there's all these associations. And all I wanted to do was know more about her and see, like, what's your day like? Like, what do you do during the day?
Right.
Where do you go? Where have you been this whole time? And what happens if you're one of the smartest people in the world, but you've never really been outside of this school that you were raised in, basically, this institute? What happens when you go out to the real world? Does any of that matter? Would any of that save your life in a scary situation? And so that was kind of, I just started, I'm like, what is she going to do? And I couldn't wait to see how she was going to figure things out. So I did a decent amount of work on savants and things like that to better understand her.
Yeah, that seems like you got several elements here that it baffles me that you're able to do this without outlining. And this, I'm speaking as someone who never outlines. Okay. But like, you've got the whole savant thing going and all the details of all these different conditions that this girl has. And then you've got it set in the 80s. So like that, all that requires a whole lot of research, each of those on its own. And yet you were just spinning these plates. Like, no wonder it's your pandemic book. Like, you'd have to have nothing but focused time to write something like this.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that hard when you think about it, because you're like, all right, because the whole, when I write, the whole book is like, what happens next? What does this person do next? And to your point, if she goes to a mall, I'm like, what did the mall look like in 1987? Was there a mall that was open? Are there photos of it that I can see? What were the stores? Oh, Camelot music. I remember Camelot music.
Yeah.
So it was actually a lot of fun to do that. And the other beauty of setting things in the 80s, as you know, there's no phones, there's no maps. There's, if you're in trouble and you're out somewhere alone, you're kind of screwed. And that's great for a thriller.
Yeah. That really helps amp up the anxiety and danger of the whole thing, I would think. Like rolling around with an actual key map,
Right.
Right.
I was there's scenes where she's got a Thomas Brother guide,
Right.
But fortunately she could go into a gas station, look at it and memorize it and not have to buy it. So
well, there you go. That is an advantage.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
what were some of the ways? I mean, you mentioned like you found photos and things online. Did you like go? Here's what I discovered. If you go on YouTube, you can find all kinds of videos. People were using video cameras in like malls and other things in the 80s without any concept that later somebody would be able to just type the phrase in and look that up online. What were the ways that you handled that side of it?
I mean, that's 100% it. A good example is of course I wanted to write a mall scene. I was 17 years old in 1987. So of course you're writing from your own memories and your own nostalgia. But I just happened to set this book, at least initially in Wisconsin. And I found a mall that Penny, my protagonist, would have gone to, and it had just opened. So I found somebody who videotaped walking through the mall on opening day back in late 1986. And, I could watch videos like that for hours.
Yeah.
Because it's amazing. And then you get into the arcades and the food court, hot dog on a stick and all that good stuff.
I get sucked into the vortex of watching old 80s commercials.
They're amazing. Or
they're
print
a
ads
trip.
are amazing.
Yeah. Everything is so loud.
So loud. Yep. Totally.
So, now, what about the savant side of this? Like, what were you doing? Were you just like reading articles online, or What'd you do to kind of dive?
Yeah, a lot of reading articles online, listening to interviews, watching. I even remember watching found old clips with Letterman, and Letterman, actually, the Letterman show features in this book, but clips where he would have savants on, and okay, this kid's going to stand up here and recite pi to the 200th decimal, because that's all the time we have, but he can do it to 10,000.
Wow.
And you're just like, that's amazing. So, but you start looking at how do they make eye contact as a savant? Are they
Yeah.
comfortable in their own skin? Are they comfortable talking to people? Do they want to, so all different traits. And it was just fascinating to watch and read about, how it affects their normal day-to-day life, if they're even have a normal day-to-day life.
Yeah. So you brought up that she could walk in and look at a map and not have to buy it. What were some of the other ways that the whole savant side of this played into the plot of the book?
So one of the things when she basically leaves the comfort of this institute to go searching for her father. So she leaves without any plan at all.
Yeah.
And so, within hours, she's like, oh, I've got to eat. How do I do that? How do I
Yeah.
make money? So she's in the mall. And so one of her talents is she draws with photorealism, but it's not like she sits and thinks about how to draw. She actually sees in her mind dots appear, and she's basically connecting the dots. They come at a rapid fire burst on the paper in her mind. And so, she sees a guy doing caricature portraits for $5, and she's like, I can do that. And she
Yeah.
starts drawing like lifelike pictures of people, and people are just amazed. And all of a sudden she's thinking, maybe my art will support me while I'm on the road.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's a lot of traits that she doesn't have. She's not great at math, and there's things that she can't do that other savants can. But her ability to draw and her ability to remember do help her for sure.
Yeah. That's I mean, I want those two skills, frankly.
Me too.
How much
I don't know if I
yeah.
want to remember everything, though. There's something about fuzzy memories that's very comforting.
We don't really think about that, but I remember I think I watched a documentary about somebody who had that like perfect memory thing. And there's a kind of curse that comes along with that. Like, you can
Yeah,
ask
of
her
course.
to recite whatever happened on such and such date throughout her life, and she can give you details, but
Right.
it ends up
Right.
being a burden more than anything.
Right.
So that that's on, like I said, that I'm obsessed with that whole thing. So well done. I am excited about this whole story. What have you set things up in such a way that is there going to be an additional book in this? Is this part of a series, or is this a one-off, or?
Yeah, I've never written a series. This is my 9th book, and they're all standalones. I will say the 2 before this one were interconnected in a way
Yeah.
that if you read them both, you would get maybe more out of it, but they were also both standalone. So I finish a book, and as much as I want to revisit these characters sometimes, I'm more excited to find a new world.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a driving force. It's like, who are these people that we're going to talk about? And sometimes I'll have that connective tissue. Sometimes I'll have little Easter eggs
Mm-hmm.
that I do for myself. Like, maybe somebody goes to college in a certain book, and that happens to be the college that, something took place in 3 books ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I do a
but
lot
generally
of
speaking,
that.
yeah, it's fun. I mean, I'm like, no one's going to catch this, but it amuses me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
generally speaking, I'm ready for a new cast of characters.
Yeah, yeah. I've done a lot of series in my career so far,
Oh yeah.
and a handful of standalones. But I kind of wish I was doing more of the standalones. How much? Well, you haven't really done series, so you can't really talk at it from that direction. But like, how challenging is it to get people to pick up a standalone book? I mean, I have sell through for my series. I'm trying to figure out like, if I
Yeah.
write something that stands on its own, what's the challenge for me there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think there's an answer that anybody knows for that, because,
Mm,
everything's a double-edged sword, because even if you're starting out as a novelist, and you have a book and you tell your potential publisher this could be a series, they are most likely going to say no, because we have no idea how your book is going to sell. So we don't want to commit to 3 of these things.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do a series, as you're kind of, as a new author, you're probably going to your agent with 3 books already done, because that's the only way that it's going to happen. Once you're established, maybe you could start writing a series, but it's really difficult. So I think going from series to standalone, I don't know. To me, it feels like if you've established yourself, they're going to trust. People are excited. Like, well, what are they going to do outside of this universe I only know them for?
Yeah.
And to me, that's exciting. That's like, I remember reading, not that Grisham was writing series, but everything was obviously a book about lawyers. And he wrote A Painted House, which had nothing to do with lawyers. And I read that book and it was sublime. And I'm like, and I was almost emotional over it, because I'm just like, you think of Grisham and like, I've got this picture in my head, and his books are great. They're not National Book Award great, but I read A Painted House. I'm like, this is a beautiful book. And I didn't know he could write like this. So I think it's amazing when an author does that.
I think Grisham, actually, this is my personal opinion, so keep your emails, everyone, to yourself. But I actually enjoy those books more than the legal thrillers now. And he wrote, there's 2 books so far in this little mini series he started. The first was Camino Island,
right,
and the second was Camino Winds. And I read those, and I'm like, I just devoured those 2 books. And I've read everything Grisham's written. I'm a big fan, but those 2 books stand out as my absolute favorites. He just does there's something about the way he shifts when it comes to those. But this isn't John Grisham's interview. This is Carter Wilson's interview.
I was just going to say the only other example that's great is Ken Follett going to Pillars of the Earth.
Right.
And you're like, am I going to be interested in a 1,000-page book about 16th century cathedral building?
Yeah.
And you read I can't get enough of this book.
Yeah. Turns out you are.
Exactly. It's wild.
So, when's your 1,000-page book about a cathedral coming out?
Yeah, I will say that The Father She Went to Find was a bit of a departure for me.
Yeah.
Because it's more of it's a dark thriller, but it's also kind of coming of age. It's kind of a road trip book. And it's funny because when I approached it, and I'd been thinking about this woman for so long, and I finally started writing her, I'm like, I always write first person present tense. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can get close enough to this person who is so profoundly different than me to write that. So I wrote the whole thing third person past, and my editor's like, I'm not connecting to this book. And we had lots of conversations about it, and we tried a lot of different things. And finally I said, like, let me do 20 pages first person present and see how that looks. And I sent it to her, and she's like, there she is. There's Penny.
Right.
So
isn't that interesting?
That begat 4 months of rewriting the entire manuscript from third person past to first person present, which is way more than just changing the verb tense.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
The entire voice changes and comes alive. And so every sentence changes in its entirety. So you're really rewriting the entire book. So that was a huge task, but it was very eye-opening.
I've done it and I didn't enjoy it, but it did make a big difference to make the shift. And isn't that interesting though? Because it's like it's
hand-to-hand combat.
Somehow you're putting on the skin of that character. Like it's like being an actor at that point. Like and you're tapping into some other part of your psyche or your soul there. That's got to be jarring.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, what happens is I think some of the best writing comes from a place not of plot or character development, and obviously those are important, but from a place of emotion. How is this character feeling? And I think when I wrote third person past, that wasn't coming out. So I think shifting to like you said, to taking over the skin of that person. That's where you really tap into your empathy as a writer, and you are literally in their shoes, and you're like, this is how I'm feeling all the time. I feel the sun on my face. Much more than she felt the sun on her face. So it really changed.
congratulations to you for being able to channel your inner 21-year-old savant female.
Savant, yeah. Female
done,
savant, yep.
You've done an excellent job. All right. So as we mentioned at the head of the show, this book comes out on April 2nd, 2024. So if you're listening to this podcast after that, you can just rush right out and buy it. But is it on pre-order right now, I'm assuming? Like they can go
on pre-order. Yep, pre-order everywhere.
Fantastic. So, and where can people find you and everything else about you in this book?
Yep, carterwilson.com. It's got my books. I also do writing retreats and coaching, and then my appearances and podcast and all that good stuff.
All right. I'm looking over your site now. It's you've got it almost as many menu items as I've got. So
I know
there you go.
It's gonna be a problem.
Yeah, that's the trick. All right. Well, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. I know this is great. I can't wait to I see the book out in the wild. So
awesome. Thank you, Kevin. I really had a good time talking to you.
So since Carter is a podcaster and we are podcasters, I wanted to ask you guys, like, has podcasting impacted your writing career at all?
I don't know if it hasn't impacted the writing side of it, but I feel a lot more confident public speaking than I ever did before. If you go back to the very first Writers Inc. episode that I did, I think I said the word like 6,000 times. Now I only say it about 4,000 times. So it's improved substantially. And there I go. Yeah.
I'm newer to the podcasting, but I've been interviewing authors for a few years for print. And I definitely think there's always something valuable I take away from every interview and interaction that, even if it's just like, oh, I never thought about that, or a new resource, or a confirmation, of like, okay, all right, this is, many paths to publishing. I think that it's been incredibly valuable to me as a writer.
Yeah, I feel that too. Like it's helped with, like you said, confidence. So just with trusting yourself, with knowing that your process is fine, that everyone does it differently. I really think it helps with that. I definitely trust myself a lot more after speaking to many, many authors.
Yeah, I tell you, it's podcasting was the foundation of the current career I have, because I started a podcast so that I could talk to authors and learn from them, not just authors, but everybody, any entrepreneur really. And not only did I learn from them and I made connections and I expanded my network because of that, it directly led to opportunities that have benefited me. Like, my work at Drafted Digital was a direct result of podcasting. So are all the, I go to all these conferences and speak, all that had podcasting at its root. So it's been a tremendous, powerful tool for me, and one that I'm continue. Like I'm always doing some kind of podcast, even outside of this one. I've got the Word Slinger podcast. I've got other things that I've been invited to do another show. I just can't get enough of this stuff, apparently. So Carter and I talked about the way he researched this book and other books, and I mentioned, I rely pretty heavily on YouTube for things. What's a go-to source of research that you guys fall back on?
Oh, it depends so much. I mean, like, is it a cheat to just say the internet in general? Like, I don't know.
Professionally, we refer to it as the interwebs.
Okay.
Can you imagine doing this process without the internet? Like if you wanted to write a book,
Yes. Because I went to graduate school and I had to do it before we had this stuff, and just would hang out in the library for my whole life.
Yeah.
So it was awful.
That probably added a ton of time to that project, right? Like, I mean, because it's so easy. Like I was writing a scene this morning taking place in Chicago, and on a specific street. I was able to look at that street. I was able to pull up the buildings, confirm the direction that the traffic flowed, because I've been called out on that before. Having people go north on a street that only goes east and west or whatever. But it took me all of 15 seconds to confirm all that with the internet. So I can't imagine having to do it some other way. But he
going into the library, getting someone to find the map.
Yeah, he brought up something when you guys were talking, like a simple callback can kind of take you there. Like you guys mentioned Camelot music, and like just hearing that chain like immediately brought me back to the mall, hanging out with my friends at the mall, going into
I
Camelot.
could smell the place.
Yeah, like I can still see it the way it was
See the
laid out, and
Reeboks.
like it's so something as simple as that. 2 words can just take you back to a specific decade. At least for those people that are familiar with that decade. I'm sure if I said Camelot music to my daughter, she would probably just stare at me and tell me to like and subscribe again or something. She wouldn't know what I was talking about.
I actually have no idea what it is, but I think that's just because I am not from the U.S. But I remember malls in the 80s and neon and Reeboks and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guarantee you saw something like it. Yeah, every mall had something like it, and we spent so much time in there. And then, like Hastings was in my town where I grew up. We lived about 45 minutes from a small town called Lake Jackson, much bigger than our town, and it had a Hastings in the mall, and that was literally the only bookstore in a 50-mile radius. And so that's where I spent my time. Was Hastings.
Hastings was big. Borders was another one that you only found in the mall.
Yeah, I remember Borders.
Borders, man, I just watched a whole documentary about Borders and the collapse of it. It made me very sad. Find it on YouTube. There's a.
They may come back, like the print is having a resurgence. Maybe we'll see the print bookstores show up in the mall again. I guess they got to bring the mall. They got to bring the mall back before they can bring the mall bookstore back.
Yeah, exactly. So, am I the only series writer here? Do any of you write series?
I mean, I would love to write a series, but I'm not there yet.
I do.
You do, Christine?
I do, yeah.
JD?
JD does.
Yeah.
Like actually, yes. Okay, so yeah.
I'm on book 6, so I guess that counts.
Yeah, I mean, do you find that to be a very different experience from writing one-offs? Is it,
Yes.
We talked a bit about this, and he made a really good point about, selling a series as a first-time author is, I think, he pointed out is a very tricky thing. I've never really attempted to sell a series, though.
That's why mine are all standalone with series potential, at least the ones that I've written. I'll get
That's kind of the way you need to do it, right? You need to sell that first book. It needs to work as a standalone. If you can carry it on, you carry it on. I mean, I think I've told this story before, but when we were shopping Fourth Monkey, the publishers, we started getting a ton of interest. And it was a standalone. I never meant for it to be a series. And my agent called me and she's like, do you have an idea for a second book? Because I think I can get you like a 2 or 3 book deal. So I quickly hashed out, a sequel to it, which ended up turning into a trilogy. And now I'm writing, 3 prequels. I'm writing a sequel, another one. It's easier for me to write a series, probably for anybody, because you've got the characters already in mind, the locations, everything is already there. You're just kind of coming up with your story and hitting the ground and running. You don't have to create everything from scratch. But I do like writing the standalones too. To me, it's refreshing to be able to visit brand new characters, new situations. So personally, I like to jump back and forth. If I could get into a rhythm where I'm writing one in the series, one standalone, and back and forth, that would be my sweet spot. But I got to get it.
I'm starting to do that.
Yeah.
I'm working on the latest Kotler book now, which I hadn't done one in quite a while. But I had an idea and I had something I had started, so I jumped back in. But I think that's the rhythm I want to fall into is do a Kotler book. I have another series called Quake Runner. I'll do one of those, and but I want to do more standalone books going forward. But it is kind of handy. But I do try to I go to a lot of effort to make each of the Kotler books a book that you could read on its own, which is not easy to do because especially the further you get into a series, there's like 12 books in that series right now, plus like a handful of like novellas that tie in, and there's no way you're going to do like a full summary of this character and his traits without it becoming like its own, like a completely separate, addendum or something. But I'm starting to kind of master the trick of like just hinting at things and being able to kind of parlay, like he has this relationship with this character, without going into great detail. That's tricky though.
And I think readers are more patient for summary at the beginning of a sequel book than we are as writers. Because if they don't care, they're just like, oh, yeah, I remember. And they'll skim through it, right? And start reading without the recap. And some people need that.
You cannot skim a Kevin Tomlinson novel.
No, just
Come
the
on.
recap part. When you're in a book and it's like number 11 and they're like, here's our previous summary. It's like those Netflix things you skip the recap if you remember. But if you don't, then I think you're pretty patient with it, you know?
Yeah. And I've always structured the Kotler books as being kind of somewhat modeled on TV in a way, like, because I do a cold open, which, you know, it's a preface, or a prologue rather, and it's a cold open just like you'd see in like Castle or something like that. And I've been toying with the idea of doing a previously on at the, you know, like just
not?
doing like a quick 1 page, like previously in Kotler, and doing that. So have you ever, or would you ever write a book that completely upturns any expectations on your work? So like JD, you write a lot of horror stuff. You write thrillers, but I mean, you've got a certain vibe. Would you ever write something that was completely outside of that spectrum?
I had a conversation with Dean Koontz very early on. He helped me craft some of the language that's on my Wikipedia page, and it basically says that I'm a suspense author, and those novels may include elements of, and then it has, I think, sci-fi, romance, this, that, and horror. So my general thinking is, as long as I have suspense as that common thread between all the books, the readers will come along for the ride. So I'd have to do something really way off base, I think, for that not to work. And it does work, like, as long as you can find that common thread. I think it worked from the reader standpoint. I got a ton of pushback. There was a particular editor that wanted to sign me pretty much every book, and then he always said no. And his general excuse was, I'm still not sure what kind of writer Barker is, because, you know, he came out of the gate with a horror novel, then he came up with a thriller, then he did the prequel to Dracula, you know, so we're back to horror, then another thriller. Like, I can't put him in a box, and because of that, he wouldn't sign me. You know, it wasn't really a complaint about the writing, it was a complaint about that. So I think from a reader standpoint, I think readers are a lot more accepting of it, but from the business standpoint, your editor has to be able to go to the marketing people and say, this guy is a so-and-so writer, he's a horror author, she's a thriller author, so the marketing people can go to the bookstores and the sales staff and communicate that same thing. And when that gets muddy, nobody knows how to sell the book. So it's a catch-22, but I think ultimately you got to write what you want to write, you know. So if you feel like,
look, I'm telling people I'm a thriller writer, and I write science fiction thrillers and fantasy thrillers and
yeah,
romance thrillers. I'll write whatever.
I mean, one of the other pieces of advice I got early on, again from Koontz, he said that if you are going to bounce around in genres, do it from the get-go. Just like I did. So I went from horror to thriller to horror to thriller, back and forth again. To put that in context, I had that same conversation with Patterson, and he wrote his very first book. It was called The Thomas Berriman Number, which I don't even think he has a copy of. Nobody read that one. But his second one was Along Came a Spider, and he kind of fell into that serial killer formula. So his next 4 or 5 books were all basically the same book, with different characters. And then he wanted to do something different, so he wrote one about a girl with wings called When the Wind Blows. Totally different style, and his readers just jumped all over him because at that point, they had read 4 or 5 serial killer novels. They wanted another one. So for him to give them something different, it really, really threw them. So I think your hardcore readers will be on board for it. The ones that are just kind of there, on the fringe, they may not be.
This, by the way, is why I really heavily push build yourself as the brand. Like, you're what you're selling. And I do write a lot of different things that, especially like my Substack and all that stuff. Like, that's not thriller content. It's not even related. Because what I'm trying to cultivate is a group of readers who will buy anything with my name on it. That's the kind of reader I was. Like, there's authors that, they could have their name on a label of Campbell's soup or something, and I'm going to buy that and read that label because it's, it's got that author's name on it. So that's what I'm looking for, trying to cultivate that.
So when should we expect your low stakes cozy, Kevin?
Any minute now. I'm going to first I'm going to have AI write it for me, and then I'm just going to go through and spruce it up.
Translate it to French and get it out there.
Get it into French, get it into German.
All right. And with that, JD, who is up next week?
Next week, we've got Stephen James. He's the critically acclaimed author of 18 novels, including the bestseller Bauer's Files suspense series. He's also a fantastic teacher. If you get the opportunity to attend one of his classes, you should definitely jump on that. His latest novel is called Fatal Domain, and it releases April 9th.
Sounds great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.